By Katie Cherkasky, the former federal prosecutor, constitutional law attorney. We've also got Andy McCarthy with us, the former assistant U.S. attorney, Fox News contributor. And last but certainly not least, my friend Shannon Bream, the anchor of Fox News Sunday and our chief legal correspondent. Shannon, I ended with you. If I could begin with you. Now, we already got a sense of where the defense is coming from here. We get a sense from the prosecutors that they were, that is the defense, wasted its time in their argument, going so far to say that there's absolutely no evidence that the defendants in this case, their due process rights have been harmed in absolutely any way, even acknowledging this relationship in the first place that, you know, you had to drag out of them to get in the first place. But what do you make of that this did not move the needle or affect the case that they're prosecuting?
Well, this judge has really tough decisions to make on a number of fronts before he actually gets to his decision. One of those is what he's going to apply here. Does he have to find an actual conflict, which would require more of that concrete discussion that you're talking about, those facts that the defense says they don't have? Or is it the appearance of a conflict? And you heard that the attorneys who were arguing for some of the Trump co-defendants saying there's this 2005 case in Georgia from their Supreme Court that lets you look at the appearance of conflict. You don't have to actually have the conflict. He's also got to make a decision about all those cell phone records that one of the co-defendants is trying to enter into evidence. All of the texts, the phone calls, the location, thousands of bits of information. Whether that gets in or not is also a big piece of this case. So the judge will have to get through a lot of, factual and legal issues before he actually gets to making a decision about whether it means disqualification here.
All right. Is that it, though? Katie, the one thing I was curious about, it's one thing to say, all right, Fani Willis, you have to go. This is just deplorable behavior. It makes everyone look bad. Nathan Wade, you too. Or can he go even further than that? This case is exploding. We start from scratch. I mean, what are his sort of ground rules for himself?
Well, the issue that he's deciding at this point is a motion to disqualify specifically. So it's not necessarily a motion to dismiss, but the decision he makes could have collateral impacts on what happens moving ahead and whether this case can even move forward. One of the questions that the judge asked that I thought was very interesting was if he is to find some sort of forensic misconduct, such as perjury or lack of candor to the court, would that then impact every other indictment that Fani Willis, as the district attorney, signed in the county? And that is an astronomical thought to have in terms of what kind of damage control would need to be done. But certainly that would apply here, even if another DA's office were to pick this up. So the ethical mess is very complex, but for the purposes of what he's deciding in this motion and in the order, it will be a determination of whether they are disqualified from this proceeding in particular.
So let's say you're part of Donald Trump's legal team here, Andy, and let's say she was dismissed. And bottom line, she's gone. Nathan Wade is gone, but the trial continues. Do they still have grounds for appeal to say, look, this started out as a circus, and we're not sure it's going to resume any less?
Well, a big question, Neil, would be, is it just Fani Willis and Nathan Wade who would be out of the case, or is it the entire Fulton County District Attorney's Office? It occurred to me watching this, and obviously this has been an issue throughout these proceedings, but there may have been a couple of different ways you could have handled this. The way the Fulton County DA's office decided to handle it was to jump in with both feet as the advocate for Fani Willis and Nathan Wade. And it just seems to me that they've kind of attached themselves at the hip to their principles. And maybe that was the way that the boss wanted it. But it's hard for me to believe at this point, the way this was all conducted, that you could potentially disqualify one or both of Wade and Willis and not also disqualify the office. I think they either all have to go, or I think the office will go if Willis has to be disqualified. The other thing I would just think about is, in the Trump camp, if I were in it, is the practical effect of this. You have March 25th, we're going to have what looks like a 4 to 6 week trial, as it's now being estimated, in New York in connection with the Manhattan DA's case. And in South Florida today, they're having argument over when they're going to schedule the Mar-a-Lago documents case, where they seem like they have a window because of the complications of the Washington case. You do get to a certain point where you say to yourself, when on earth is this case going to be tried? There's no trial date here on the horizon, and you're running out of days on the calendar, especially if you have Willis looking at a re-election campaign.
Another thing that comes up, guys, is just the timeline on this relationship and more, and all the other parties who might or might not have been aware of that, but now are. And I don't know how that confuses things, but I did know with the timeline that, this is a lot more involved than I thought. I want, Shannon, if you can just respond to the series of timeline bites on who knew what and when. Take a look.
How does the timing of the relationship impact a financial interest?
Because it's part of the scheme she created intentionally in order to give benefits to her boyfriend. They know that if Your Honor finds that that relationship started in 2019, that the appointment of Wade itself was improper, and if that was improper, then he had no business as an average citizen, along with the fact that they didn't have approval from Fulton County to appoint him in the first place. That undermines the indictment. It creates a structural impairment in the indictment because he had no more business being in the grand jury room than I did. So that's what they're worried about. And the reason why it's important for the financial piece, Judge, is it's how the money ended up going back to her. She put her boyfriend in the spot, paid him, and then reaped the benefits.
All right, so it actually starts earlier than was assumed, and does that timeline actually sound worse for the prosecution than we earlier believed? What do you think, Shannon?
Well, what Willis and Wade have said under oath on the stand is that no, it did not start earlier, and that it only happened after he had been assessed and hired for this particular job to do this specific work as a contractor. But you have Robin Yeardy, the old friend of Fani Willis's, and you also have Terrence Bradley, who used to be a law partner of Nathan Wade, both saying at one point that, yes, this started much earlier. Now, when Terrence Bradley was put onto the stand, he had these texts back and forth with Ashley Merchant, who's one of the attorneys for the co-defendant. She had said, did it start earlier? He said, quote, absolutely. He then went on to offer unsolicited details about when and where, the timeline of the relationship. But when he got on the stand this week, it was, I don't recall, I was just speculating, much less definitive information. So this judge has got to make an assessment about the credibility of all the people he's heard from on that timeline and what he believes is actually factually truthful about it.
Katie Cherkasky, one of the things I get a sense from listening to the prosecution is that, yeah, they had a relationship. Yeah, it might have gone on a little bit earlier than we might have acknowledged or thought. They didn't go that far, by the way. But what difference does it make that they're saying we were prosecuting Donald J. Trump? That never got in the way. Their relationship never got in the way of that. Nothing in their presentations demurred from that. But I found it sort of to be a specious argument, but I'm no lawyer. What do you think of that?
Well, the issue with the relationship is not necessarily that there was some sort of relationship. The issue started arising when there was lies being told about when it began. And I think the judge has very credible circumstantial evidence before him based upon the testimony of both Yeardy and Bradley, who were both very close with these individuals at the time that the relationship was going on, that it began earlier. And the point is that that was never disclosed. And certainly I think that even if it had been disclosed, it probably would have presented a conflict of interest because of the financial gains that she stood to get from having her romantic partner in that role. But nevertheless, it's been exacerbated by the purported lies about the timing of it, which I do think the judge has seen established before him. The question is whether they can close the loop and determine that there's an actual conflict there. But that's only one ground upon which she could be disqualified. There's other issues that the defense also raised that wouldn't even necessarily require that the judge affirmatively find that they perjured themselves and still find that they could be disqualified.
So when I'm looking at who said what and when, I know that Donald Trump's lawyers are saying that they played, these lawyers were playing the race card, essentially, that they were being attacked based on their race, and that attorneys had argued that the speech that Fani Willis had given in an Atlanta church only furthered that, and it potentially, got in the way of what was something that they were debating in that courthouse going after Donald Trump, that she played the race card and the guard card at once. What did you make of that, Shannon?
Well, it's interesting because it's extraneous, meaning it was a separate conversation that happened outside of these proceedings, that conversation, those statements she made in the church. And one of the attorneys stood up and said it wasn't just the race issue, but it was also that she talked about God is on my side, or suggesting that there was a religious aspect to this too. And he said those things are inflammatory, and that's not supposed to be the way that you talk about these cases when you're prosecuting them. And remember, separately, she was disqualified from another branch of this case back in 2022 regarding the lieutenant governor when she'd been involved in some way or connected to a fundraiser for his Democratic opponent. And what the judge said in that case is we don't expect the DA has to be apolitical, but her prosecutions, her investigations cannot be. So this outside conversation about how she was talking about this case in other places, meaning in that church service, that was brought up quite a bit by these attorneys today, numbers of them.
So let's say, Andy, the prosecutor's office, the whole office, that I think you had debated that they could all go or be dismissed in this case. If they knew very early on, oh, yeah, Willis and Wade are an item or whatever, and this proceeded, what is their culpability here?
Well, I think, Neil, the reason that they'd have to be out is simply because they've joined arm in arm with Willis and Wade in this cause. I don't think there's a sensible way to disassociate them. So I can't see the office saying if Willis has to go. The thing that really piqued my interest, particularly when Shannon was running through the timeline, is, we've talked an awful lot about the conflict and the ethical basis for asserting that there is a conflict that would have them have to get out of the case. I thought it was very interesting that the lawyer for Trump raised the possibility that Wade was illegally hired, that is, without the consent of Fulton County, which apparently is county law. They needed to approve his hiring as a special prosecutor. That's the first strand I've heard that really could lead to something where you'd have a possible argument that the case should be thrown out. It's one thing to talk about the ethical obligations of the lawyers. You just get rid of the lawyers, get new lawyers, and the case goes on. But the law is certainly in federal law with respect to the grand jury. They're very persnickety about who's authorized to be in the grand jury. And that can go to whether the bringing of the case was legitimate or not. That's really the first strand I think I've heard that would give you at least something to argue from, that the actual indictment should be dismissed.
It's kind of weird, too, because I remember when Fani Willis was on the stand, she was very indignant, not only the accusations, but even in her tone and tenor about how anyone would dare question her ethics and morals. This is from Fani Willis a couple of weeks ago.
You're confused. You think I'm on trial. These people are on trial for trying to steal an election in 2020. I'm not on trial, no matter how hard you try to put me on trial. I don't need anything from a man. A man is not a plan. A man is a companion. Let me tell you which one you lied in. Right here. I think you lied right here. No. This is the truth, Judge. And it is a lie.
That was surreal, and I'm beginning to think, all right, the case, whatever you're trying to make, has just been completely, knocked off its tracks with those statements. But what did you think, Katie?
I think it was a terrible defense strategy. She's not on trial, but she's certainly in a defensive position. You heard the prosecutors today basically arguing reasonable doubt about why these timelines and these text messages don't tell us what they obviously tell us, which is that they were in a relationship. They were clearly communicating tens of thousands of times. There's no reasonable way to explain that away. But certainly she has done herself no favors with how she's handled this. There's been no answers to the mail, as it were, on many of these very direct questions. And the judge does seem to have evidence of actual perjury in front of him. So in terms of her future here, she's obviously going down with the ship. She's made that decision. She didn't see herself out of this earlier when this might not have blown up to such a level. But I do believe that this is going to be not only an issue for this case, but for her professionally and maybe even politically.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that too, Shannon. You're in the prosecutor's office. You see some of the, salacious comments that have come out and allegations, and you're probably wondering, Fani, you are killing us here. It's one thing if you have to go, but if we're all blacklisted by the same scarlet letter, sorry, equating the two, we're all doomed. And you're embarrassing us to no end. I'm just wondering then how that sinks in now to an entire office that could be sort of shunted aside. And then what?
Yeah, it's possible that they are. There is a state agency in Georgia then that would decide whether or not this moves to a different DA within the state. And listen, a different DA may handle this completely differently, not frame it as a RICO case, not have multiple co-defendants. I mean, somebody else could handle it completely differently. I think it's important to note, though, too, that you saw one of the attorneys today, John Merchant, I believe it was, who was talking about what happens even if Fani Willis stays on the case. They've got to consider that possibility as well. And he said, listen, if we can establish that she has developed a personal interest in this case, even if you don't disqualify her, we can move for a completely new trial. So they're already thinking the steps ahead, and maybe people within her prosecuting office are thinking steps ahead. If it goes the other way, you got to consider that you're no longer on this case, but those co-defendants have to think about what happens if she stays on the case, because that's a very real possibility too.
This was a state case, right, Andy? I mean, there was a move afoot early on that the Trump people wanted to be a federal case. Maybe they had built into that the possibility, he returns to the White House, it can just be dismissed or can go away. What happens now? Let's say if they start from scratch, the RICO thing notwithstanding that Shannon touched on, the state case versus maybe making it a federal case. All that's up in the air as well, right?
Well, for the moment, they've lost on that one. They tried, Mark Meadows, who's a co-defendant in the case, tried to get it moved into federal court. He lost at the district court level. He's now lost at the 11th Circuit. So the question is whether they'll try to appeal that to the Supreme Court. It's interesting because I think you could see that issue being intermingled with the fact that the Supreme Court has taken former President Trump's immunity claim, and they're going to make a decision on that. Because if they make a ruling in that case or reason in that case about what the ambit of federal immunity is, what's the outer perimeter of somebody's federal responsibilities, that could actually affect the arguments that Meadows was making to say that I was within the ambit of my federal responsibilities when I was doing the things I've been charged with.
Andy, I don't want to interrupt your mic, friend, but I want to go. Andrew Evans, Nathan Wade's attorney, is speaking outside the courthouse, and I do want to go back to all of you. This is Nathan Wade's attorney.
She was in the area before they were even together, before she even moved down there. So that's what came out in the hearing today. But I don't have any more comments.
And you're saying he was not in the area to see her?
She didn't even live there. There's roughly the same amount of cell phone calls from the 3-month span before Fani lived in that area that there are in the 6-month span after she moved there. It shows that he was already going there for other reasons. Plus, there were plenty of times when she wasn't down there at all. So the cell phone records don't prove anything.
What about the cell phone data showing that he was staying in that area overnight?
I don't have a specific comment about that. I don't know anything about that.
Do you think next steps would be to try to challenge this data?
Yeah, I mean, for all the reasons that were mentioned in the court about the foundational problems and about the lack of testimony supporting it, it's probably not going to come in, but we'll let the judge make that decision.
What do you think your next steps are in this case?
He's going to have a ruling within the next couple of weeks, so probably just let him decide.
All right, it's hard for me to hear. Maybe you heard better at home, but I think what he was saying was there's nothing to see here. We can move on. But, of course, Nathan Wade's attorney, Nathan Wade, of course, the romantic interest of Fani Willis here. Andy, on that particular issue, and I know I was going to the state versus the federal case, does something like this give, wider parameters to changing not only the venue, it could be in another cases in another area of Atlanta or somewhere in Georgia, but changing what type of case it is, period?
Well, if they have to be booted, that is to say, if the whole office has to be booted, then it's going to be a new prosecutor from a different office with fresh eyes that will look at this. And it seems to me that Fani Willis is the one who was invested in doing this case as a RICO. She was talking about doing it as a state RICO case for, I think, about a year before she even brought the indictment. A lot of us who've looked at this don't think that she has much of a conspiracy case. Personally, I think this is not a RICO. I did a lot of RICOs in federal prosecution. I don't think this is an organization that in time and space is something that you would regard as something like a mafia family or the like. I doubt that another prosecutor who wasn't for some reason invested in that theory looks at this case and says this is a RICO. What this case should have been was probably about 5 or 6 smaller cases. And that's being reflected, Neil, in the pleas that have been taken. Not a single one of the 4 people who pled guilty have pled guilty to RICO, and they haven't even pled guilty to a serious offense. No one's going to do an hour in prison for what's been pled to so far.
If you can all stay in place here, you're obviously referring to the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act. I believe Rudolph Giuliani, as an attorney going after Wall Street titans, he had used that with great effect to get them behind bars. Sometimes that was overruled and a lot of them were exonerated, but it goes back to that where you can at least draw multiple acts of racketeering activity that would certainly raise eyebrows.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.